The motto, "The Senate and the People of Rome," is a stolen brand of medieval rebels, not the legacy of ancient legions. The official chronicle of a 1,000-year Senate is a product of the imagination of 16th-century counterfeiters. Until the 12th century, Rome lacked any mention of republican traditions or civil liberties. The famous four-letter formula was first recorded in the year 1143 as a battle symbol of a city riot against the power of bishops. All the ancient paraphernalia we are used to seeing in movies is merely an elaborate set piece created to justify the ambitions of later monarchs and the papacy. The real creators of Rome lived 1,500 years later than indicated in textbooks, and now you will learn exactly how this bloody mystification began. The riot that built a republic. The foundation of the ancient state was laid by an ordinary street pogrom in the 12th century. The Roman militia liquidated the old administration and formed the Senate during an open uprising. This was a primary act of state creation, not an attempt to imitate mythical ancestors. Giordano Pierleoni took the title of patrician, consolidating the power of the city elite and completely abolishing the influence of priests. The slogan, "The Senate and the Roman People," became the official brand of the new republic right then and there, marking the citizens' right to their own taxes and laws. Historians deliberately portray the energy of living rebels as a copying of ghosts from the past, but a clash with a real emperor exposed this lie completely. Barbarossa and the upstarts. The German emperor officially declared the Roman senators impostors, failing to recognize them as heirs to a great empire even at point-blank range. In the year 1155, Frederick Barbarossa arrived at the walls of Rome for his coronation, but was met with a bold ultimatum. The leaders of the city senate demanded an oath from the monarch and recognition of their ancient rights. Frederick's reaction was shocking. He flew into a rage and directly called the senators upstarts without a pedigree. To him, these people were common city rabble who had invented their privileges yesterday in a tavern. The monarch found neither continuity nor the greatness in the city that modern textbooks insist upon. In the authentic documents of that era, there is not a single mention of a connection between the 12th century rebels and a mythical Caesar. If an ancient senate had existed for centuries, an emperor obsessed with legitimacy could not have ignored that fact. He saw before him only an arrogant novelty, not an echo of antiquity. All the senators' speeches shattered against reality. They had no proof of a connection to the past. The branding of a medieval mayor's office. The famous logo of the empire is merely a legal stamp of a medieval mayor's office used to mark city property. The formula, "The Senate and the People of Rome," SPQR, adorns every souvenir today, but its real history is devoid of pathos. Archaeologists record the mass use of this inscription specifically during the Republic of the 12th century. It was not a call of the ancestors, but a harsh political marker. Citizens placed these words on buildings, shields, and official acts to declare their independence from the papal see and foreign feudal lords. An analysis of genuine ancient sources reveals a frightening void. In texts officially dated to the era before our era, this abbreviation is extremely rare and often found in manuscripts whose origins raise questions among experts. Most proofs of the motto's antiquity are the result of large-scale restorations and alterations from a later time. Scientists simply added the necessary letters to old stones to visually link the medieval commune with the fictional greatness of the past. The papal phantom. During the rebellion of the 12th century, the Senate could not have fought the Roman popes for one simple reason. At that time, the institution simply did not exist. Chronicles insistently speak of the heroic struggle of the townspeople against despotic papal oppression, but an impartial audit of documents exposes a massive lie. The concept of an infallible pontiff with absolute secular power and his own army is a pure ideological construct of the 16th century. In the reality of the 12th century, the Senate fought for the city streets against local bishops and feudal clans who possessed only local influence. There was no sacred vertical of power in sight. The entire endless list of holy fathers who supposedly ruled Rome since the time of the apostles was artificially stretched and filled with fictional names after the fact. This was done to justify the antiquity of the church hierarchy and legitimize the church's right to own land. Historians simply took real figures and multiplied their phantoms across the timeline, turning local priests into world rulers. The Renaissance printing press. All the grandeur and power of ancient Rome were constructed not by builders, but by printers in the workshops of the Renaissance. In the 1500s, European elites and the Vatican urgently required a high-status biography to justify their right to rule. A group of hired intellectuals and humanists engaged in a massive project to expand history. They took real, documented events of the 12th century, the bloody wars of the Senate, militia uprisings, and conflicts with German emperors, and mirrored them into a fictional antiquity. A mass substitution of names and dates occurred. The real rebel leader Giordano Pierleoni and his associates became prototypes for legendary heroes who never existed in nature. Forger historians simply rewrote old parchments, adding ancient polish and removing any mention of the medieval origin of the institutions. Thus, a local riot of a city council was transformed into a great confrontation within a world empire. What key detail in the texts did the forgers leave in plain sight, accidentally revealing the true adolescent age of the ancient Roman Empire? The ancient ruins were not erected by Caesar's slaves, but according to blueprints and engineering technologies of the late Middle Ages. Official science forces us to believe that Roman temples stood untouched for 2,000 years, but chemical analysis of the mortar tells a different story. The composition of the building mixtures, the brick firing techniques, and the stone processing methods in ancient sites are identical to those of the 12th and 13th centuries. Fragments featuring the Republican motto were crudely integrated into walls like patches during the massive reconstructions of the Renaissance. Buildings were subjected to artificial aging. They were intentionally destroyed and buried in the soil to visually reinforce the paper fantasies of forgers regarding a multi-century history. Most strikingly, a detailed inspection of many prehistoric columns reveals tool marks from instruments that were only invented and popularized 1,000 years after Caesar's alleged death. Rome is a giant theme park where medieval walls are passed off as ancient shrines. If the stones lie, what does dry mathematics show? Could a city of 1 million people even exist in the era depicted by textbooks? The mathematical absurdity of a megalopolis. The story of 1 million-strong Rome in antiquity is a mathematical absurdity that shatters against the laws of physics and biology. The official version paints a picture of a giant metropolis, but an elementary audit of resources proves otherwise. Sustaining 1 million people requires logistics, sanitation, and food volumes that only became possible in the industrial era of the 19th century. The real Rome of the 12th century, with its population of 30,000, is the actual maximum that the territory and technology of that time could support. To feed a fictional ancient million, fleets of grain ships would have had to arrive at ports every minute, and the sewer system would have had to surpass modern counterparts. In reality, the Cloaca Maxima and the aqueducts are engineering solutions of medieval masters, later declared lost secrets of the ancients. The entire scale of the city in textbooks was inflated tenfold by 16th century forgers to turn a provincial center of a rebel republic into a mythical world capital worthy of the imperial ambitions of new rulers. The Mirror of Chronicles. The works of ancient historians are not chronicles of the past, but political pamphlets written by medieval authors for specific commissions. It is suspicious that the manuscripts of great ancient authors are miraculously discovered in monastic basements, exactly when the 12th century Senate requires ideological justification for its actions. An analysis of the texts of Livy and Tacitus reveals that these compositions are saturated with domestic details, legal intricacies, and military nuances characteristic exclusively of the Renaissance. The compilers of these ancient works didn't even hide the fact that they were creating an ideal manual for contemporary politicians. The books were not created to record real events, but as a powerful tool of influence, allowing the ambitions of current elites to be presented as the will of ancestors. The style, vocabulary, and even geographical errors expose these sages as people who never saw a legion but were well versed in the intrigues of 16th century courts. This was the most extensive literary mystification, turning fresh ideas into forgotten wisdom of the ages. The stolen millennium human history contains a superfluous millennium that was artificially created to fill a frightening void in the archives. We are used to thinking that an abyss of 2,000 years lies between us and Caesar. But an impartial analysis of chronicles reveals the phenomenon of time inversion. Real figures from the 12th century were intentionally pushed into the deep past, turning into pale shadows of themselves. The entire layer of so-called antiquity is merely an echo of much later events that actually occurred but were duplicated by forgers on paper. This manipulation allowed for the creation of an illusion of endless progress and fall, even though in reality, civilization developed much faster and more briefly. We have spent decades studying a fictional hallucination, ignoring facts that indicate ancient artifacts still smell of fresh paint from medieval workshops. The massive shift in dates allowed for the concealment of the fact that the modern world stands on the shoulders of 12th century people, not mythical heroes from the mists of millennia. World chronology is a house of cards that will collapse if the backdated centuries of silence are simply subtracted. The nationalization of rebellion. The achievements of real 12th century senators were brazenly stolen and declared the heritage of antiquity to erase the very possibility of a successful uprising from human memory. The authentic creators of the republican idea in the 12th century built a unique management system completely free from the dictates of the church and monarchs. This was a dangerous precedent, a living example of how a city community could manage its own taxes, courts, and army. The success of the Pierleoni militia was so contagious for all of Europe that future absolute rulers decided to devalue it completely. They conducted a nationalization of history. All real feats and legislative acts of medieval heroes were attributed to dead characters from a fictional past. By making the idea of a republic an ancient, unattainable ideal, the forgers turned it into a museum exhibit unsuitable for repetition in reality. Any attempt by a modern person to claim their rights is now stifled by references to the imperfection of human nature, using the fall of a fictional empire as an example. The final act. The set pieces of the great ancient past hide the truth about real human potential. But are you ready to see the finale of this grand theatrical production? Great ancient Rome is not the foundation of civilization, but the most successful marketing project in history, created 500 years ago. We have deconstructed step by step how the symbols, laws, and the very idea of the Senate turned out to be products of the fierce 12th century, not a dust-covered antiquity. The official version of history taught in schools serves only one purpose: to legitimize the power of current structures through a connection to a fictional golden age. The massive theft of medieval heroes' achievements allowed the Vatican and monarchs to build an illusion of eternity and the immutability of their world order. All the prestige of spqr and the shine of imperial eagles is merely a smokescreen hiding a real, much closer history of the struggle for freedom. When the sets collapse, we see not ancient gods, but the living, daring people of the Middle Ages whose deserved glory was stolen. Rome was only the beginning. Tomorrow we will prove that the Egyptian pyramids are actually contemporaries of the cathedrals of Paris, and this truth will shock you even more.